Well, we're joined this evening by Lamprecht, advocacy manager at Women and Men Against Child Abuse, to take us through what we heard from and about Nicholas Ninow today. Luke, a very good evening to you, and thanks for your time.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
And I suppose the common sentiment is, yes, okay, we understand that you went through all of this. We understand that you had a terrible childhood, as have maybe 3/4 of the country, having gone through most of what Nicholas Ninow has experienced growing up. Didn't make us child rapists.
Sure. Look, I think the big thing about Mr. Ninow's testimony and that of the two professionals and his grandmother is we need to recognize that adverse childhood experiences, which you obviously experienced, they have very detrimental long-term outcomes. So I think part of it was about the country reflecting back on how we're raising our children and saying if we allow these things to happen, like unplanned, unwanted pregnancies with teen mothers who feel unsupported, who abuse substances, the chance of their child doing something that we now consider monstrous is very, very high. And the problem with it, that, you know, as a society reflect on, it's easy for us to make him the monster. Yeah. But he was raised in our country by us. So I think that's where South Africa's had a hard time with this particular evidence. You know, there's a group saying, you know, because of his experiences, we should have looked at treatment and rehabilitation, and there's others just absolutely outraged.
To say it's no excuse.
100%.
So I don't know how much of the testimony you managed to watch today, or
Most
actually
of it,
catch most of it. How much of that do you actually believe in terms of, I didn't plan it, it was a mistake? The grandmother saying, you know, he's two different people, this only happens when he's high or drunk, and just that this is just not him and not something he would have done had he been sober.
Look, there's always this, there's almost the same kind of push and pull in his evidence and the professionals' evidences in the public at the moment. Because what was happening is you see him looking very tearful, but then you see him saying, well, you know, it was wrong place, wrong time. I was just, you know, it was something impulsive. Then the psychologist saying he has had this detrimental background, but that's not sufficient to undo the minimum sentence. So I think everybody's really grappling with it. What struck me was that the ability to take another person's perspective, which is remorse, is something that I haven't met him, but I didn't quite get it from the evidence, not from the two professionals nor him.
And that's been throughout this trial, hasn't it? We barely saw it as well. It's not just today. Yeah.
No, and I think because of the changing of the versions, things sort of moved and shifted. And as it sort of might have helped him mitigate his sentence, it shifted a little bit. Then she was in the wrong place. Then he was under the influence. But he does remember, but he doesn't remember. Then he tried to hide it. Then he told the truth, and he didn't. So this kind of shifting sands, we look at three basic things. Do you know the fact? And he started by denying fact. Do you deny the impact? We're not sure if he can truly take the perspective of the victim or her family. But the big one is denial of responsibility. And I never truly heard him say, I am truly responsible. It was my childhood, it was my mother, it was the drugs. Yeah. There wasn't an owning of this is me. There's two different Nicholas. It's almost like he's saying that there's somebody else that did this, that is not him sitting in court. So it didn't quite gel for me.
So you have to wonder, in light of what has happened in the country, or what has come to the fore, it's been happening in the country for many years. We've now made it, you know, we've thrown the spotlight on it, and the president's saying, yes, now we need to really, you know, teach such perpetrators a lesson. Do you see that Nicholas Ninow is going to be the first person to face the harshest punishment, or face something harsher than what is set down for, usually, for a crime like this?
Look, I think the evidence needs to be understood today, because basically if you rape a child, you get life. That's a minimum sentence. So I mean, and you have to show that there was something that was exceptional. In other words, it wasn't just related to the general population, as you say, bad childhood. There's something about you. He went for psychiatric observation. The judge kept asking, differentiates for me to the professionals between regret and remorse. So trying to grapple with that the whole time. So I think if he gets anything less than life, I would be extremely surprised.
Can somebody like Nicholas Ninow be rehabilitated, you know, corrected, if we had to put it that?
So rehabilitation is an interesting concept, because if you look at his history around his substance abuse, and knowing by his own evidence that when he's on drugs he does bad things, he's not the same person, yet he kept going back to it. He was then medicated, so he was medicated for mania, and he still went off his medicine because it dulled him down, and he still went and took the substances. So rehabilitation in a resource poor country is extremely difficult because the amount of input you need is just so enormous, and I don't think we have it.
And it seems there have been attempts for him to get sober, to get off the drugs over the past couple of years. But I just want to very quickly for us, do you agree that Nicholas Ninow is not the only person who needs to be held responsible here? If we look at the family, if we look at other relatives, if we look at friends who saw this person and did very little to, I don't know, remove him from society or help him deal with his own demons, should we hold all of them responsible for this also?
Well, look, very, very simply, if anybody knows under the Sexual Offences Act that someone is an abuser, they must report it. The problem is that under the Children's Act, if you are a professional, you must report it. So what we want is the law changed to say that everybody who has knowledge, whether it's a grandmother or a parent, they must be held responsible because they're the first people who have contact with the early deviance that leads to the later offences.
Okay, and the scary part is he's now a father himself. So
Indeed.
That is, thank you very much, Luke.
Thank you, Rebecca.
You know, wish we didn't have to talk about these things, but here we are, and so many lives destroyed by this incident. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Rebecca.